Hello and welcome to Tattva, Conversations and Explorations. For our third episode, I sat down with Dr. Mark Balaguer, a professor at the California State University, LA. His main research interests are metaphysics, philosophy of mathematics, philosophy of language, philosophy of logic, free will, and metaethics. Apart from several academic papers, Dr. Balaguer has also written 4 books on these topics. The 1998's Platonism and Anti-Platonism in Mathematics, 2010's Free Will as an Open Scientific Problem, 2014's Free Will, and Metaphysics, Sophistry and Illusion, which was published in 2021. We talked about philosophy of math and what philosophers of math bring to the table of mathematics. We also delved into the phenomena of free will and what it means to him. We hope this conversation can help the listeners see math as a philosophy, as something beyond the textbook, beyond the fear, beyond a sense of inadequacy, and see it for its tattva, for the wonderful way it gives us to look at the world and ourselves. Hello, Dr. Balaguer. Welcome to Tattva.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. So, I think a good place for us to start would be to understand what it is that you do, to be a philosopher of mathematics. What does it entail?
Different people think of it differently, I think. Here's 2 ways to think of it. One way is it's the philosophy of mathematics is sort of like an interpretive enterprise to try to understand what mathematics is all about. And so the main thing is like understanding mathematical practice and what mathematicians are really up to. But there's a different way to think about it, which is it's ultimately concerned with metaphysics and the nature of reality, because there's a deep question what mathematical theories are about, right? With empirical science, like physics and chemistry and biology, it's obvious what those theories are about. They're trying to give us the best account they can of the physical world that we live in. But mathematics doesn't look like it's doing that, right? It's got these theories of infinite structures like the natural number structure and the set theoretic hierarchy and the real number line. And you might think ultimately that's really about the physical world, but that's actually not a very popular view. And so the question arises, what are these theories about? And one view is that they're about non-physical things. And so if that's right, then believing mathematics gives us a reason to reject the physicalistic view that everything is physical. And so when you think of the philosophy of mathematics that way, it's part of this metaphysical project of trying to figure out the ultimate nature of reality and whether materialism is true.
Okay. And what made you gravitate towards it on a personal level?
The second thing, like when I was a student and I started reading some of this stuff, I started getting very interested in the idea that mathematics was best thought of as a theory about non-physical aspects of reality. And I thought that was really interesting. I don't know if I believed it. I don't know if I've ever really believed it, but it struck me as really interesting. And, you know, I'm a philosopher, not a mathematician. So that's what got me interested in it.
What does a day look like in the life of a philosopher? What are your goals and what are your processes?
Well, of course, I teach, so that's like one thing I'm doing in my daily life. But then in the hours when I'm not teaching, I'm writing. And, you know, so I just have big projects that I'm working on. And sometimes I'm working on a little paper that's going to take me just a few weeks to write. But, you know, a lot of times I'm working on books that take years to write. And mostly that's what my day looks like, teaching and writing.
So, and the goal, I think you kind of summed up in your previous answers, where it is to find these abstract objects, whether they exist or not. Am I right?
Yeah.
That's the goal?
That's the goal, is to figure out whether there's, in that part of the philosophy of mathematics, the goal is to figure out whether there really are such things as abstract objects, where an abstract object is like a non-physical thing that mathematics is about.
So I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos, of people who are mathematicians. And when you start probing them, even a little bit, when you start probing them, they do touch upon aspects of beauty, of, intuition, of these slightly abstract ideas in themselves. So they do active mathematics, but they're touching upon these ideas. These ideas are kind of revealing themselves through math. But you are, as a philosopher, not actively involved in doing math. But then how is this observation happening? Is there a misstep? Is there something like a gap because you're not doing the math itself, but you're involved in only the ideas? And how's that happening?
I'm going to answer your question by giving you an analogy. And if I haven't really answered your question, you can ask it a different way. Okay. But here's a way to think about, philosophers and mathematicians are doing different things. So here's a way to think about it. Suppose that you are a linguist and you get interested in French grammar, and you're working on a theory of what's the best grammar for French. And so French is not your native language. Maybe you studied it in college for a couple years. You move to France, you're sort of getting a little bit better at it, but you're a trained linguist and you have a PhD in linguistics. So you've got this knowledge. And then what you do is you rely on native speakers of French to check your theory. And you're like, I've got this. And they're like, no, that's grammatically incorrect. So you don't speak French, but you construct this theory of French grammar. And the weird thing is that native speakers of French have no idea what the right grammar is, right? They know a grammatically correct sentence when they see it and an incorrect sentence when they see it, but they can't tell you the rules of grammar. Just, like none of us can, except for trained linguists who have learned these theories. And so the weird thing is, like, something about French that they don't know, even though they're actually the real speakers. And there's something like a relationship like that between mathematicians and philosophers of mathematics. Like, I know some math. I've taught a little bit of math. I was a math major as an undergrad. So I'm kind of like somebody who moved to France and like lived there for a year. And I'm like kind of fluent, maybe a little bit, but I'm not really a native speaker of French. And like for me, like, I'm not a mathematician. It's not the thing I do is prove theorems. But I think about what mathematics is about, and I'm doing metaphysics, trying to figure out what reality is like and whether mathematics can tell us that, and also trying to figure out the best interpretation of mathematical language.
So from your analogy, you are saying you are well-versed and you speak the grammar of the language of math.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not a native speaker of mathematics, but I'm an interpreter of mathematics in the way that a non-native speaker of French can be an interpreter of French.
Right. Just to hang on a little more on the subject, what I know now, it's a study of reality, I think, which is, I don't know if studies get any bigger than that. So then still the question I would want to ask, and let's see where we go from here, is what is a philosopher of mathematician? And I'm sure there are many. What are they bringing to the table of the subject itself?
Of mathematics?
Yes.
I want to say, maybe this is going to be disappointing to you, but I want to say maybe not very much. Just like, what does the linguist of French bring to French speakers? Like, not much. They don't need to go learn the grammar to be really good. You could be a great poet or a great novelist in French and like have total mastery of the language, but have no idea what the linguistic theory is. And it's not clear that learning the correct grammar of French in the sense of a linguist is going to like help you be a better writer. And so I think the same thing, like, it depends what you mean. Like, what philosophy of mathematics brings to, if the table is like all of academia and like the body of human knowledge, then philosophy of mathematics is bringing a lot to the table, namely knowledge of reality and the nature of mathematics. But if the table is just mathematics, it's not bringing a lot because it's not telling us the answers to mathematical questions. Now, sometimes I think it can bring this much. And this is maybe going to be a little bit more detailed than you want. But in mathematics, there are open questions, just like there are in science. So, for example, in set theory, there's a question that's open called the continuum hypothesis, which is basically, like, to make it very simple, the continuum hypothesis is the idea. So in set theory, we know that there are many sizes of infinity. It's a sort of surprising result. Intuitively, it seems like maybe there's just one. Once you get to infinity, you can't get bigger. But George Cantor proved that there are many sizes of infinity. In fact, infinitely many sizes of infinity. There's more real numbers than natural numbers. And the natural numbers is the smallest infinity. And the real numbers is bigger. And the continuum hypothesis says that the real numbers is the second biggest, the second smallest, it's the next smallest kind of infinity. And so, and the question is there another kind of infinity between the natural numbers and the real numbers? And it's an open question. And not just is it an open question, it's unprovable in current set theory. So in order to settle it, we need to find a new axiom to settle it. So mathematicians, a lot of mathematicians got into this idea that because it's not provable in current set theory, there's no right answer to be had to the question. And other mathematicians thought, no, there is a right answer because realism is true. So if you thought math is about abstract objects, like Kurt Gödel thought, then you would think there's a right answer. There are real objects out there. We have to find the answer. And if you thought, no, there's not really any abstract objects. These are just theories we've created. They're just formal systems. So there's no right answer. But both of those people, in saying that, and this can dictate how mathematical research goes, whether people are trying to settle the question. But both of those groups are smuggling in philosophy, right? They're doing philosophy of mathematics when they come to these conclusions. But just like I'm not a mathematician, they're not philosophers, and mathematicians might get it wrong. And in this case, I think they did get it wrong. And the right thing to think is that the philosophical question of whether there really are abstract objects is independent of the question of whether there's a right answer to the question. And the whether there's a right answer to the question depends on whether we've got a precise notion of set in our head and whether we've zeroed in on the right, on one structure. And so that's one way in which philosophy of mathematics can help mathematics is by preventing them from making mistakes in the philosophy of mathematics that lead them down a wrong path in the research of mathematics.
Oh,
is that clear?
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I don't know how this will connect to what we were talking about, but have you seen this film called Pi?
Yes, I've seen it.
Okay, so it's about this one genius mathematician and his mentor, who's also a retired mathematician, Robeson, and Max Cohen is the younger, the genius mathematician. So there is a scene in the film, and they're both, and the go board is there, and you can see that there's something philosophical going on right there. And why I bring this in is because I think it mixes philosophy and math in a very beautiful way in like 5 seconds. 5 minutes. The scene is short. So he says that the older mathematician says that the ancient Chinese, ancient Japanese used to think of the go board as an aspect of the whole universe. It represents the universe. Okay, and then the universe as it is, the possibilities are infinite, and that means chaos. Anything can happen, right? So here, and then he comes in, his protege, who says, yeah, but as you play the game, the possibilities become smaller and the board begins to take an order. So there are two mathematicians. That's the beauty of it. There are two mathematicians and they have a mathematical way of thinking. These are active mathematicians. But of course, because of the kind of problems they have been doing in their life, like the Robeson spent 40 years looking for a pattern in pi. Is there a pattern in pi? So the mind had been trained in a certain way. And so both of them are talking philosophy. One is talking order, one is talking chaos, and they both exist, on that go board. So I think that is what you were saying. I think one amazing interview, if I can make this happen, would be to have a philosopher and an active mathematician sit together and, kind of talk it out. That'd be nice to see. Okay. Yeah. So most people are afraid of math. Dr. Balaguer, I used to get nightmares even after I finished school in India. Okay, I finished school, I used to get nightmares. Either I've forgotten there's a test or I've forgotten the answer, something or the other. And we used to talk about these things, and a lot of people feel that way, whether it was in my school, another country, people feel this way. So now, as a philosopher of mathematics, what do you think is a fundamental reason for this fear, and for this fear to continue on? And if you could look at it from three angles, like some of the habits that the education system in general I'm saying, so it might be different in America, it might be different here, but the education point of view, some habits that they're not breaking free from, the approach of the teachers as they teach, and the attitude of the students as they bring in, that is keeping this fear alive. What do you think is the fundamental reason for this?
I'll say some things. Let me start by saying I am not at all an expert on these questions, right? These are questions about education and child psychology and all sorts of stuff that I don't consider myself expert on, but I've got some thoughts. So one thing is, mathematics, as I think about it, is a discipline that discovers truths. And so for example, earlier I was talking about this proof that Cantor did, that there's more than one size of infinity. Yeah. That's a very surprising result. You were talking about beauty before. It's a beautiful result. The proof is beautiful. It's just a great piece of mathematics. That is not taught in the schools, right? In the schools, you learn how to add two numbers together to get the right answer. That's when kids are very young. Then, of course, they get older and they start learning to do trigonometry and algebra and calculus. But at least in the United States, the way the education system is set up, it's very much mathematical education is very much geared around solving problems. Learn a skill, learn how to solve problems of this kind, right? And it starts in second grade with adding two numbers together and goes up to calculus when you're a senior in high school. But it's all about solving this problem and having this skill. And that's a very one-sided view of mathematics. It's about using mathematics as a tool to solve problems. It's not about the actual discipline of mathematics itself. And I don't know anything about child psychology. Maybe that trying to teach kids proofs of beautiful theorems when they're 7 would be a disaster, but it might not be so bad when they're in high school and it's not done. So that might be a thing that could be improved. As far as the fear goes, I suspect that what's going on in these kinds of mathematical classes where you're learning the skill to solve a certain kind of problem, some people are naturally good at this skill and some people aren't. And I suspect that the fear comes from people that aren't, if you don't have success at it right away and the class is moving on and you're lost and you don't know how to, it's to me, it's if you're trying to you're teaching kids soccer and one kid starts being not quite as good as the other people, and then they keep going and they're better. And then the kid just doesn't even want to go to practice. It's not fun because they're not good at it. And I suspect that that's what's happening in the math case. And I think that everybody can learn this. And so it's I don't know what the solution to that problem is, but it's about having a safety net to catch kids and seeing when they're not keeping up and getting to them and getting them confidence. I mean, fear is all about a lack of confidence. And you start thinking I can't do this. I can't do this. And then it just becomes a nightmare. And if you can give confidence to the students, then I think that would help with the fear problem. But I don't, this is not my area of expertise. As a philosopher of mathematics, the thing I would say about this is we might think about trying at some point during the schooling, I'm not sure what the appropriate age to start would be, of teaching real mathematics, the mathematical theory of mathematical structures. And
we did not get to the part where the approach of the teachers and the attitude of the students. Is there something you would like to say on this? Then I'll come back to where we go.
Well, I don't know enough about it to comment on it, except that, I was a math major in college and I was always good at math when I was in high school. And like the approach, the approach always seemed to be learn how to solve this kind of problem. Now we're going to have a test on it. Okay, now I'm going to teach you a new kind of problem to solve. And that I honestly didn't have any idea what mathematics was about when I was in school. I was like, oh, you just learn to solve these problems. So I'm just saying the same thing again.
No, and you're also saying that because it came to you easily, there was no reason for you to look into it further, what's really going on. It just came to you. So you just did it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I honestly didn't start thinking about mathematics in the right way and appreciating it until I started studying the philosophy of mathematics. And then I started studying like set theory and arithmetic and as theories of mathematical structures, and learning about it then while I was doing philosophy, and I just taught it all to myself. Right. I didn't learn any of that and I had a major in mathematics as an undergrad.
Right.
And I didn't learn any of that stuff in college.
Right. I get your point. In fact, you have somewhere given me an answer to a question that I had placed in later, and I believe in stories a lot. So because I don't have a mathematical background. The last question I solved was really more than a decade ago. So, now I'm kind of entering through the ideas involved in mathematics, saying something as simple as this. I have a brain, I can hear, and I have a curiosity, and I can just put all these things together and listen to videos by people like yourself and understand what is being conveyed and get a little one step closer to math as not as a subject in school, but as a discipline. Yeah, as a discipline. So there was another film. It's a Japanese animated film. It's called Only Yesterday. So in that film, it has nothing to do with mathematics, really. There were many other films that I watched, but this film in particular had one short scene. So the girl she's a 27-year-old unmarried girl. She's reminiscing her, days in school. So she remembers this one time where she comes back home and she's not scored well in math. And she's sitting in front of her mother and showing that, it was dividing fractions and, I don't understand what's really going on. And everyone in the family begins to question her IQ. It's so simple. You just have to invert and multiply. And then she says, but you guys don't understand that. What do you mean dividing fractions by fractions? It's not getting into my head. The language of math is not getting into my head. And she tries to illustrate it to herself that she takes an apple, she cuts it into 2/3, and something she does. And in the end, she says, see, the result that you expect, what I get in reality is bigger than what you're showing me. I don't get it. But people say she's stupid, she's silly, and she grows up with that idea for the rest of her life. She said, for that one thing, maybe she was quite good into the other subjects. They don't get into it. But that math, and she's talking to this young guy and says, maybe I'm just simple-minded, maybe I'm just stupid, maybe I'm just too slow. And the other guy says, but I don't know, math came very naturally to me, so I never used to give it too much thought. So what I wanted to ask you was just this, that at what point can we introduce math as an idea? And would it be useful? And I think you've somewhat answered saying that, it might be a good idea.
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea. The worst case scenario.
How would you do it? If you had to propose, where would you start? At what level would you start? And just thinking out of the box, where would you say, okay, this is where I drop. This is the first idea I'd like them to have. Or would you say that let them ask me a question and we'll say where it goes from here? What would your suggestion be?
I don't know when to start. I would guess maybe high school.
Oh.
So I think 9th graders, 10th graders starting to take geometry. Maybe that would be a place to start it, because I think it's easy to see geometry as like a theory of space. And so maybe that would be a time. And I think back on myself at that age and I was not very interested in stuff like that. So I don't know. I think everybody's different. Some freshmen in high school might really take to it. Others might not care. Certainly in college, right? They're in the United States anyway, you can't really get a college degree without taking at least some math, or maybe you can get out of it because you took some advanced math in high school. I'm not sure, but I don't think there are very many like it should be that you should be able to get out of your math requirement by taking a class in mathematical theory. But
if we don't limit ourselves by the current system. So here is something. The mathematician I spoke to earlier, Dr. Rashna Sen, she's an Indian mathematician, and she has recently written a book called Reimagining Mathematics, where what she's proposing is that you introduce math to children through nature. So let them observe. If like where we teach, say, parabola or certain, I don't know, all these different curves and all in mathematics through numbers and formulas, these exist naturally in nature. So if you go out in nature, you observe something, when you come back and see it mentioned in the textbook, no matter at whatever level, the connection you make is stronger, and you know that in some sense, and I don't mean it in a philosophical way, but in some sense for the child, it becomes real. There is a connection. It is kind of outside the textbook. It's not just limited to these 500 pages and of painful questions.
Yeah.
You think that's an interesting idea to probably experiment with. What do you think?
I mean, that sounds good. Is she talking about with pretty young children?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Mm.
But then, like, I mean, that sounds great. That sounds great. I'm just thinking, like, once the kid gets to be like 14 and they're starting to do more advanced math, it's even like what you were just talking about, the division by, dividing fractions by fractions. It's so counterintuitive. It's really easy if you just remember the rule.
Yeah.
You go, here's how you divide fractions. You just do this, calculate it, and come out. But knowing what that means is a lot harder. And I think that was the problem in this thing, because like, it's so counterintuitive. Like, wait, I'm dividing something and it's getting bigger. Like, what's happening? And it's really hard to make that be about the world, right? Like it seems to me what's going on there is that it starts out being about the world. And then we develop these techniques and these concepts of multiplication and division. And then we like extend them into this, and it starts becoming more and more abstract until you get weird things that it's really hard to think of them as being about the physical world. And it's almost easier to not think that and like go, just you're messing yourself up. Just forget what it means, do this, and you'll get the right answer.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, but I think it's a great idea to like, at least aspects of math should be connected to the world. And even at the highest levels, it ultimately is. I mean, quantum mechanics is like a mathematical theory. It's like embedded into all of our understanding of reality.
Great. Yeah. So I was looking for words that mathematicians or philosophers of mathematicians are using to describe math. So there is beauty, there is truth, there is intuition, there is imagination. So I want to focus on the word truth. Okay. And I will be drawing for this first part of our conversation a bit from my own experience, because that's what I have. I remember in school, math problems were of two categories, right or wrong. So, okay, I get it. So that right or wrong, whether a thing is right and whether the thing is wrong is an aspect of truth. It's an aspect of truth. But do you think, maybe it'll be a more philosophical question than I intended it to be, but do you think the small semantic difference could be contributing in the way we look at math, in the way we think of it? Because truth is not something, at least not in my school growing up. What is the truth of this answer? Is this answer right or wrong? Is there something there, or am I just going nowhere? I should just step back. I'm philosophically wrong.
So is what you're saying that if we use the word true instead of right and wrong, then it might be more inviting to students and more interesting to them? Is that your suggestion?
Does it open a door? This is a small difference only. Does it make any difference? Because all people at the highest level who have been doing math like for ages and they're in love with the subject, years of tears, as Dr. Sen calls it, but they're in love with the subject and they use the word truth. Is there something to it? Or I'm just like, it's the wrong door to knock on.
I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. And like you could do a study to see if people respond better to truth than right. It'd be like an empirical, in the psychology department. It's interesting. You might be right. I'm not a great person to ask maybe because I think about this stuff so much, but in my ear, the word right and the word true just sound like synonyms. They just mean the same thing, right? Like that's right, that's true. Those just say the same, or that's correct. Those all say the same thing. So I feel like for me, it wouldn't matter because they sound synonymous, but for little kids, they might sound very different, right? And it may be that truth makes it seem more interesting, and right and wrong makes it seem more like I'm going to get punished.
In your own experience, how has your study of the philosophy of math altered your worldview, altered your life, and how has the experience, because I'm sure it must have been a journey.
I think that for me, becoming a philosopher, being trained in philosophy and doing philosophy and thinking about philosophy, it alters your worldview in many ways. I think the most important way is that it makes me, and I think that I speak for all philosophers when I say this, it makes me not be sure about anything. It makes me question everything and doubt everything, and everything needs to be thought through, and nothing is in the bank for sure, and everything is up for grabs. So that's kind of like the method of philosophy and how it alters my like overall worldview. Another way to understand your question is like by coming up with answers to philosophical questions, has that changed your worldview? And my answer to that, I think, is not really. Because I think I'm not sure about the answers that I've given to philosophical questions. I might be wrong. And there's a way in which the answers to the kinds of philosophical questions I work on, some people work on questions that are more socially important, like they're doing social political philosophy or applied ethics about real ethical issues in our culture. I'm doing stuff about, what's the nature of mathematics and reality? And it's kind of removed from your everyday life. And so my views about mathematics and reality don't much influence, I think, the way I am in the world, when I put my philosophy down. But the method of philosophy and the practice of questioning everything does. I just notice when I go in the world and interact with friends who aren't philosophers and they start talking about politics, and the thing that's most striking to me is how confident they are in their views, when from my point of view, I'm like, you're just talking out, you don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea if what you're saying is true. We need to ratchet down the confidence by 7 levels here.
Right. So, but as you're moving between these two worlds, so to speak, are there still certain ideas that you have been able to, if you can recall any, that you've been able to carry, bring back from that world and infuse them into your life and kind of experiment with it, play with it, hold some, let go of some?
I mean, I want to say that I'm just repeating, the main thing is disbelief and doubting, and this is a theme in my philosophy too. One view that I've pushed is that it may be that none of mathematics is true, but it's all false because it's a fictional story about abstract objects that don't exist. I'm not saying that's the right view. That's a view that seems plausible to me. And I often think that about lots of, so I'm of the view that it may be that virtually everything we say is false and it's useful to us and we get along, but it all might be just based on useful assumptions that aren't really true. And so it's all not really in the end ultimately true. So I'm sort of repeating myself, but I think the main thing that influences my life is just this sort of doubt of everything.
So now that you have this way of looking, you'll maintain a distance from every idea. So you're not getting attached to anything really. So that gives you the freedom to look at it a little from a wider perspective. So that's helpful, right? That's useful.
And this connects to free will. It's a certain kind of freedom in a way, but I also am very much of the idea that I have no idea if I have free will. That's a 50-50 shot to me.
So do you think there's a difference between freedom? Because yeah, we've kind of, the first half is over, and we can move on to these things, freedom and free will. So there is a difference conceptually in terms of.
I think that freedom is maybe used a little bit more broadly. And I guess I would think of it this way. Like when people use the word freedom, they can mean many different things. One of the things you can mean by freedom is free will, which is like this philosophical idea of like, but like we talk about other kinds of freedom, like he was let out of jail, so he's free.
Yeah.
Right. She's got more political freedom now that she moved to this country from that country. But when we say that, we don't really mean free will in the philosophical sense, right? We mean like whatever level of free will we all have. Some people have more freedom than others because they're not in jail.
Yeah.
Right. That's a different kind of freedom. So I would say like free will is like one way in which the word freedom is used.
Okay. And I always find it interesting, like we use the word free will, right? We don't use free desire, we don't use free action, we use the word will. And will is, I think, intention, right? And is there some reason why we use free will? We've been using the word free will forever.
I mean, it's at this point, it's like a term of art and philosophy, and that's how you talk about it. Philosophers actually do talk about free action. And I think most philosophers think that, I mean, the word will is weird. Like it's not a word that gets used a lot outside of philosophy. Like people use words like action and desire and decision in normal speech, but at least in the United States in normal English, people don't go around talking about their willings. I willed it to happen. Like sometimes maybe, but the way I understand the term will is it's synonymous with decision. So free will means freedom of choice. And philosophers also talk about freedom of action. And I think most philosophers think like choices or willings are just certain kinds of actions, right? So here's an action, I raise my arm. Here's another action, I decided to go to Colorado. The decision is just a certain kind of mental action.
Mental action, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think most philosophers think, and I agree with this, that the problem of freedom, you can think of it as being about free action, but the really important thing is free decisions. Like you might think like, yeah, that's a free action, you moved your arm, but it was first based on the decision to move your arm. Yeah. And so the thing that really, like the buck stops at the decision. Philosophers don't almost never talk about freedom of desire, because I think most philosophers think, and I guess I think this too, is that we don't really have a choice about our desires. Our desires happen to us, right? Like, you right now, you want to go and get an ice cream cone. You don't just, it's like, you don't have any choice about that. Like you find yourself wanting ice cream. You can't right now go, like if I said, I'll give you $1 million if you right now desire that somebody pull your fingernail out. You'd be like, I can pretend to desire that, but I can't actually desire that. Yeah. You can't actually want someone to pull your fingernail out, even for $1 million. Because it's unpleasant. Nobody wants that.
So somewhere, I think one of your the Google talk that I also, now this is kind of veering away from my own set of questions, but I think somebody asked you during that talk if plants have or trees have free will, and I remember your answer being that yes, as much as the plant turns towards the sun, that's where it stops. It's not going to move, take 2 steps and move anywhere where like closer to a well or something. It can just, that it's free will. So now if we have to say, like the example that you gave in terms of the nail being pulled and the tree turning this way, so do you think free will is somewhere, what an ironic statement, but free will is somewhere determined by, let's say, pleasure, pain, the difference, the choice we make between that and between life or whatever is the opposite of it? Because in case of the tree, it's choosing life by turning towards the sun. In case of me choosing 1 million, like something else versus my nail being pulled off, I'm choosing not to be in pain. So do you think there are these determining factors that allow us to take these decisions in our minds and then act upon it or not That's another different case.
Okay. This is interesting. So two things. One, I don't remember what I said about the tree. I might have been trying to be as friendly as possible to the question. So I think most philosophers who work on free will think that human beings are the only creatures that have free will. I'm definitely not of that mind. I think that we evolved. The idea that we have free will and chimpanzees don't seems wrong-headed to me. So I definitely think that free will goes down the evolutionary chain. How far down it goes, I have no idea. I think that's an empirical question. I actually think it's an empirical question whether any of us have free will. It may be that we don't. But if we do, then I think chimps do. I think dogs do. I don't, as you go down and get to less sophisticated creatures, I'm not sure. But what I do think is that free will requires decisions. Free will is freedom of decisions. I don't think trees make decisions. I think they turn to the light, but I don't think they decide to turn to the light. And so I would be hesitant to say that trees have free will unless you could show me that they have consciousness and actually make a conscious decision to turn to the light. And if that was true, then I'd be like, oh, they can have free will.
I don't know if you've heard of these little stories where someone speaks to the flowers, has spoken to flowers, kind of, and the flowers responded. I don't know what that even shows, but it happens, and we kind of take it on face value, such a strange thing, because I think somewhere at the back of my mind, we believe that there is a mystery that we don't understand. It's our best response to it is to accept it. I don't have the mental bandwidth of a philosopher. I don't even know where to start the question. It's nice to bow down, accept it, get on with life. So it's, I don't know if that means that if they have a free will. I mean, have you heard of these things being recorded, having been such?
I have not seen any videos of this, but I believe there's a thing that happens. I don't know anything about that. Here's my question. Do we think that flowers are conscious, that they're actually thinking? So I don't know the answer to that question. I suspect the answer is no. But if I would say, look, if botanists are like, well, here's the evidence, we think flowers are conscious, then I'd be like, oh, okay. And now if that's true, then I'd be like, oh, then they might have free will. Anything that's conscious, I think, can have free will, but something that's not conscious, to me, can't have free will in the sense of what I mean by free will, which is, all I mean is like going like, oh, what am I going to do? I'll do this. And so what I mean by free will can't be had without consciousness, because it's about conscious choosings. And I'm just of the opinion that probably flowers aren't conscious. But like I said before, I'm not sure of anything. If somebody gave me evidence that flowers are conscious, I'd be like, okay. So yeah. I can't remember. I was going to say something else. You were asking about the tree, and there was something else I was going to say, but I'm not remembering now what it was.
We'll go back. So you said you don't probably remember what you say, but what was the question was?
Yeah, well, why don't you ask your question again, and then it'll probably trip me.
Sure. So the question basically was, it came from the example that you gave, that if I give you a choice and I'll give you $1 million, let me pluck your
pain, pleasure, and pain.
Pain and pleasure, and life and lack of
So I guess what I think is pain and pleasure are, for humans, very motivating factors. And so if you're given an option between something that's very pleasurable and something that's very painful, virtually everyone's going to take the pleasurable thing unless they think like, oh, in the long run, the painful thing is going to be better. So, for example, like, hey, do you want to go for a 4-mile jog right now, or do you want to have a big piece of chocolate cake? Like, a lot of people are going to go like, oh, I guess I'm going to go for a jog, not because I think it's more pleasurable, but because I think it's going to be better for me in the long run. And maybe that's about more pleasure in the long run. To me, so I think that's right. Pleasure and pain motivate us in our choosings. But to me, that's not the interesting case of free will. The interesting case of free will is when, because like a computer can do that. A computer can just go, oh, pleasure, pain, go to the pleasure, right? To me, the interesting case is when you look at two options and they look equally pleasurable. And you're like, oh, do I want to go to the movies with my friend or go to dinner with this other friend? And I haven't seen either of them in a while. And like you're torn and you're like, oh, and now they look equally pleasurable. And you have to pick. And then there's this moment, there's this event in your head where you choose one. That to me is the interesting question. What's going on there? Is that really me choosing, or is it determined by stuff that I'm unaware of in my brain? And like, it was just determined by stuff that I'm unaware of. Or was it me that was the determining factor? That to me is where the interesting case is where there's not an obvious discrepancy in things like pleasure and pain. And it looks like more of like a tie.
Yeah. In that film, we talk about pleasure, like where should we choose? I think it goes the same for pain. Like that movie comes to mind, 127 Hours, where the man gets stuck between two huge rocks and some stone falls on his arm. So either he has to just starve to death and be in pain, or he has to cut his arm off. So he made a choice. That's such an extreme case. He made a choice based on a true story. So that is also insane. But what I want to ask from you is, I'm sure we've all been in that fork in the road where should they both seem very, inviting or both seem very equally non-pleasurable.
Yeah.
So in your own life, if you've been on that fork, in that fork, so now the philosopher is you, right? Like you're there. So you're a philosopher of language, you're a philosopher of math. And in that moment, you're not saying, okay, let me put on my philosopher hat on. That moment is a moment of decision. So have you observed the thoughts that go on in your own head? I don't want to know, those are very personal things, but if you could break down of how you approach which road you walk down.
Well, a lot of these decisions are decisions that are very quick and they don't matter a ton, right? So like you're in a restaurant with your friend and you're having a great conversation and you're like looking at the menu and you have to order and you're like, oh, maybe one of those two things. And you haven't decided. And then the conversation comes and then the waiter comes and what do you want? And you're like, and like, there's no time to be like, I'm going to deliberate. You're just like, I'll have this one and you pick one. So a lot of the decisions that I think are free choices in this sort of tied way are little decisions. But then there can be big decisions. So suppose that you are living in a city that you love, but you hate your job. And then you get this job offer in this place you don't want to move to, but it's like your dream job.
Yeah.
And you've got a week to decide. And so you're trying to decide between this dream job in the city you don't want to live in and your dream city and the job you don't like. And so it's hard and they look like equal to you. And you've got a week to decide and you're thinking about it. So like, as a philosopher, I think I'm doing the same thing everyone else does is I'm like weighing pros and cons.
Values?
And I think,
values?
Yeah. Like what's better? What's good here? There's pleasure and pain, right? There's good value and negative value. Like, oh, this job is going to be good, but I'm going to be living. I'm not going to have any friends. I don't know anyone there. So you're thinking all of these thoughts. And I think, maybe I'm wrong, but all of this is an attempt to make it not tied. You're trying to think about whether one of them is actually better than the other.
Even a little bit.
Right? Yeah, just even a little bit. Right? That's the whole thing. You're writing down the pros and cons and you're trying to see like, maybe by thinking about this, I can make this be the easy decision so that a computer could do it. And the days are ticking by and maybe it starts seeming like that. And then it goes back. And then all of a sudden, like the deadline's at noon and it's 11:30 and now they start seeming tied. And now it's 5 to 12 and you have to call the person now.
Yeah.
And you've done all of this thinking through that like the philosopher does and the critical thinker does, and you failed to move them off of a tie. And in this moment, even though this is a huge decision, I feel like there's nothing the philosopher can add to this. The thing you have to do is just pick one. You just have to just pick.
So then it's what for the lack of the layman word is a gut. You're driven by the gut. just leave it to the muses, whatever they pull out of my mouth, that's the answer.
Or, I mean, if you are a believer in free will, it's not you're leaving it to the muses. It's just like the buck stops with me. I've got to do it. I've got to pick one or the other, and I don't have a good reason to. And so I've just got to pick one and like own that decision and make it mine. And like, I don't think there's anything, if you've done your work and you've failed to make it anything but a tie, there's nothing to do but pick at this point, because you have to pick. You can't just sit there because you're going to lose the job if you do that. Sitting there is to decide not to take the job.
Yeah, like so they call it, no, it's a good problem to have. But you know, there are people in the world like who are able to take quicker maybe and even better decisions than a lot. So something is going on, like is it their understanding of their own experiences in life, like they know themselves so well. Does it come down to that in the end you know yourself so well, you know in terms of what will cause you happiness, what you'll be able to do better, that somewhere these forces are there in a person who knows himself or herself really well and probably are driving his decisions in a way that will favor him, and unless there are some unforeseen circumstances, which is things go awry, you know, there's always that, the great unknown. But even there are some people who are better at taking decisions and there are some people who are not good at taking decisions, right? So probably what's driving them is how well they know themselves. And
I mean, I think that's half of it. I think there's another thing. One is self-knowledge. The other thing is a lack of a certain kind of impulsiveness, because I think like a lot of times when people are bad decision makers, the problem isn't that they don't know themselves. The problem is that they don't think through the consequences of their current actions. And they do the thing that feels good in the moment instead of the thing that's good in the long run. So like before I was talking about like the chocolate cake versus the going for a jog. Some people just always pick the chocolate cake every time throughout life. And not, you know, that's just a metaphor for like, they just always do what's immediately gratifying. And it's not because they don't know themselves. They might be like, if you ask them to talk about it, they're like, yeah, I'm really bad at this. I just always go for the immediate gratification. So if they've got the self-knowledge, but they just don't have the willpower. And so they just always go for the thing that feels good right now, even if tomorrow it's going to cause a problem. And I think that's a separate problem of bad decision-making that's different from lack of self-knowledge. So I'd say like both of those things are,
I
are a problem.
I understand. Okay. I think we can kind of get back to our the questions that I had prepared. So I found you on your interviews on this channel called Closer to Truth. And I just really loved, you know, the answers that you gave. So there is, when the interviewer, Mr. Robert, he asked you to define what an abstract object is. Right. So it was either on the question of the beauty and truth in mathematics or its unreasonable effectiveness. So that you covered there. So maybe I can post the link to both the interviews in the description box. But there is something I want to understand. So you said you defined an abstract object as one which is outside of space and time. It is non-physical, non-mental, non-causal. Now, most of these I can kind of wrap my head around. But what makes an abstract object non-mental? So this is, I'm talking about in relationship, math being the core of the question, that when we are grappling with math, we're grappling with it in our minds, right? So what makes it non-mental?
Okay. So right now, I want you to think of the Eiffel Tower.
I thought
okay. So you're thinking of the Eiffel Tower in your mind.
Yeah.
But the Eiffel Tower is not a mental object. The Eiffel Tower is made of iron and it's in Paris.
Real object.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. But you can think about it in your mind.
Yes.
So now I can grapple with the problem of numbers and I'm like, wait, what's the smallest prime number that blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking about the numbers in my mind. But that doesn't mean the numbers are in my mind. I'm thinking about them. My thoughts are about them. So any object that exists in reality, you can think about it and you have a mental representation of it. So your thought of the Eiffel Tower is analogous to a picture. Like I can go to France and take a picture of the Eiffel Tower and show it to you.
Yeah.
And I'm holding a physical thing, the picture of the Eiffel Tower. That's not the Eiffel Tower. It's a representation of the Eiffel Tower. Likewise, in your head, you've got a representation of the Eiffel Tower. And what I want to say about numbers is, if the Platonist view is right, numbers are abstract objects, they exist independently of us. You can think about them, but when you think about the number 7, that's a mental representation of the number 7 that is independent of you, in the same way that the Eiffel Tower is independent of you and your thought of the Eiffel Tower. So even though doing mathematics is a mental thing, that doesn't make abstract objects mental. Just like even though thinking about the Eiffel Tower is a mental thing, that doesn't make the Eiffel Tower a mental thing.
I got it. Thank you. And yeah, in response to a question, I think from the same interview, you were asked what difference would it make if I'll just read it out. If the abstract mathematical objects were true or not, what difference would it make? You said that if they were true, that would make reality more than just physical stuff. It would make it richer. So I have maybe 2-3 questions here. Number one is, what do you mean by richer? What is your definition of richer? How do you see it?
Just all I meant is like there's more to reality than physical stuff. So here's a worldview. There's just a bunch of physical stuff swirling around, following the laws of physics, and that's it. There's nothing else but physical reality. Here's another worldview. There's a bunch of physical stuff swirling around, and there are also abstract objects that exist independently of the physical, and they're every bit as much part of reality. That second worldview is like, it's a bigger world. There's more to it. And I think that's really all I meant by richer. It's like, there's more to that world than the first world I described.
Okay, before I get to the second question, have you seen this film, Contact? Jodie Foster,
yes.
McConaughey.
Years ago.
Years ago, right?
Yeah, I don't remember it, but yes, I saw it.
So maybe there is a scene where they're at the balcony, on the balcony at some big presidential dinner or something, and so one is Jodie Foster's character is evidence only, I'll believe it. Evidence, I'll believe it. And Matthew McConaughey, he's a what is he? He's a man of the cloth. He's a man of the cloth. So he believes in these abstract ideas. So she tells him something about a concept called the Occam's razor. Occam's razor. And I don't know what it is. I only remember the dialogue. It was so interesting just to hear it, that all things considered, the simplest explanation is the right explanation. I mean, it's just fascinating whether what she's saying is right or not. In itself is so interesting. So where is God? If he was here, he must have left some evidence. There must be some proof, and I don't see any. So she's not unwilling to believe. She's just saying, I don't see any proof. So then he turns around and he asks her, what about your dad? Do you love your dad? Did he love you? Yes. And he says, prove it. Prove it. He says, prove it.
Prove it?
Yeah. And of course, the scene ends there. So the writers did not, take it further, but they left you with something. And I know your standards. I know you've been very clear, Dr. Balaguer, in your that. Yeah, it could be. Show me the proof. I'm ready to believe. And but as long as it's not there, I mean, that's very clear as far as I can see. It's a very clear view. So anyway, that kind of took me to these stories and little films that are embedded in these nice philosophical ideas, psychological ideas that are embedded that can take your mind forward. Yeah.
So I, as you know, I'm with Jodie Foster on this. Like, give me the evidence and I'll believe it.
But do you know how
it
ends?
What's that?
Do you know how it ends, the film?
No.
You should watch it.
Okay, I will. I want to answer. I think there's a good answer to Matthew McConaughey's question.
Yeah.
And it's connected to what I was saying before about doubting everything and not being sure of anything, but believing things when you have a preponderance of evidence. And so we don't have proofs of anything in our lives. Like maybe in mathematics, we have proofs, but do I have a proof that my father loves me? Of course, I don't have a proof. That's not the kind of thing you prove, but I do have evidence. I have a mountain of evidence, and it's his behavior spread out over decades. And the best explanation, the simplest, best explanation of his behavior is he loves me. And that's why I believe it. There is, in fact, evidence that he loves me. And so I think like she can just stick to her guns and answer his question according to her own principles.
Right. I think she was so taken aback saying that the answer is so simple. He just loved me. I know it. And maybe you completed her thought. So now the second part of the question was that even though it will make things more than just physical stuff, it will make things richer. But then you also said that nothing would change as we would something to the tune of go about our everyday business. So do you really think if these things that we cannot see, which are beyond our perception, but maybe we are open to that, we have room for their existence, that they might actually exist, and if they come to light and they show themselves and say, hey, we are here, that it would not make any difference to the life of an average person to know that?
I mean, yeah. So this is a good question. I'm going to answer it in two ways. Yeah. The first way is abstract objects are ordinarily defined as being non-causal. Now, if that's right, they can't show themselves. They can't come to light. They just are there. They exist, but they don't causally interact with the physical world at all. So we can't see them or hear them or anything like that. Our only evidence of them, our only argument, I mean, I don't think we can have any really, in the end, good argument for them. But the best argument is, well, mathematics is about them and mathematics seems to work. And so we think mathematics is true. And so we should believe that these things exist. But they just sit there. They don't do anything. They don't come to light. So that's why I was saying it wouldn't matter if they like popped out of existence. And they could be like popping in and out of existence and we would never know the difference because they're causally inert. So that's half of my answer. The second half of my answer is if they could come to light and it turns out they're not non-causal and they can come to light and we can become aware of them, then I absolutely think it would make a difference. People will be like, oh my God, I saw the number 7 today for the first time. Like I've seen 7 pebbles laying on a table before, and I've had 7 ideas in my head, but I saw the number 7. It came to light for me. Then I think that would be a profound experience and it would change things. So when I said that it wouldn't change anything, I was assuming that they can't come to light. All they can do is sit there.
I'm not setting out to prove or disprove anything. I just, if I get curious about something, and thanks to the internet that I get, it's insane that I get to speak to people who are dealing with this on a daily basis. And you've covered a great ground. Probably they started with the question I'm now asking. So they've covered a great ground. But there is something, things keep, something, and it's all about connecting. I think creativity is all about, connecting these dots, what you see in a film, what you read in a book, what you meet with some person, and something seems to, so there is one, things seem to make sense. So there is one mathematician from the UK. She's her name is Katie Steffels, and very likely she's also going to be a part of this series of interviews. So she was doing a talk. It was titled Stories of Mathematics. She used the example of something called the Pascal triangle. Now, this Pascal triangle, as she tells the story, was discovered by a mathematician from Baghdad named Al-Karaji some 500 years before Pascal. So, of course, the triangle is named after that, but we're not getting there. So it was discovered 500 years before Pascal discovered it. A similar triangular arrangement of numbers existed in the Japanese tradition and was called the Yanghui triangle even before. Yet an older version of the triangle existed in India sometime in the 900s. So I think you've understood what I'm trying to say, but more. So when I watched the film Man Who Knew Infinity, which is on the life of genius Indian mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan. So when he was 16 years old, he was still in India. He got this book by G.S. Carr. It had some 5,000 theorems in it, and only theorems listed, and there was no explanation about how he arrived at this theorem. So he started working kind of backwards, and he discovered some amazing something to do with Bernoulli triangles, numbers, all these things. And later, he thought he had discovered them. The whole Indian group that was around him, his fellow mathematicians, believed that, yeah, he has discovered them. But of course, they had already been discovered. So my question is, do you think that there probably is a Platonic heaven where these ideas exist? And because it's spread across time, that people have been reaching out and plucking them. It's this great Garden of Eden, and with never yielding fruits forever. And if you kind of tune into it, you're consistent, you're disciplined, you're really, you're passionate, blessed, I don't know, that you're able to find something that people thousands of years before you found, find something people thousands of years after you were find. And because it's mathematics, that in this case, in the first case, it was a triangular set of numbers. And in the case of Srinivasa Ramanujan, it was the same set of explanations that he found. What does this say to you?
Okay, so I think what you're saying is, here's a little argument that Platonic heaven is real, that the numbers actually exist, is that we have these people existing on opposite sides of the planet, hundreds of years apart, finding the same thing. What's the best explanation of that? There must be a thing that they're finding. Like, it would be like, if math is invented, it would be like some person in England in 1900 writing a novel, and then some other person 500 years ago, and they had no connection, in India writing the same novel. Yeah. What are the odds of that? Yeah, is that your thought?
That's
this is a super interesting and cool thought. My own view is the argument doesn't work, and I'm going to tell you why. First of all, so two things. This, touching back to what we were just talking about, the numbers, if they exist, aren't doing anything. They're not like coming down into our heads, right? And like causing us. So the numbers would be playing no role in the discoveries. So that's one thought. Like how would them existing lead to the discoveries? But I think here's the more important part, is their point is that there's an easier explanation of the different discoveries of the same fact that doesn't go through the objects existing. And it goes like this. There's a very beginning of the story that everybody knows. Everybody knows this story. There's a number 0, and then 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then they keep going. Got it? Yeah, that's the whole story. Everybody go to your corners and think about it. And so now one person goes to England and starts thinking, and here's the thing, once that's set, once that initial idea is set, it logically entails everything else. All the other facts about the numbers fall out of that by rock solid logic. It's necessary. Given, if you assume that the story about what the numbers are, if they exist, all the facts about them fall out of it. Okay, so now the facts are set by the initial story that everybody knows. Just a little blip of like 0, 1, 2, 3, and keep going. All the facts are set. The person in England in 1900 is thinking and comes up with an idea based on that. And the person in India 500 years earlier, 1,000 years earlier, has the same thought and comes up with it. But there is something objective. The objective fact is what follows logically from the basic story of numbers. And that's what they're both discovering. And so there is something objective there, but it doesn't have to be the existence of the numbers. It's facts that follow by logic from the story of the numbers.
So then I got your point. So when they say something waiting to be discovered, so what you're saying is we've all started at the same place. We've all started at the same place, and at different points in time, we are going to discover similar things.
And they are real discoveries. That's the thing. There's objective facts about what follows from that little story I told you. It follows objectively that there's infinitely many prime numbers. That's an objective fact that follows from the story. But it doesn't follow that the numbers exist, because the realist can go, it's an objective fact that there are infinitely many primes. And the non-realist goes, it's an objective fact that if the numbers existed, just that little story you told, if that's real, then there's infinitely many primes. So both people get an objective fact.
Right.
And so whenever you have objective facts, you can have real discovery.
Yeah.
But you don't need the objects to actually exist to have the objective facts and the discovery.
Yeah. So it's the discovery is inevitable. Whether they exist or don't exist, okay, that is not, it's kind of irrelevant then, right?
Yeah, that's what I think. It's irrelevant. The important objective facts are logical facts about what follows from the numbers existing.
Yeah, because it's yielding the same results. It's being used in the same applications. You might have a pyramid here. You might have, something else there. But yeah, okay, great. Another, during my research, where I was also led to is a short clip of late American ethnobotanist mystic Terence McKenna. And he is talking about Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorem.
Mm-hmm.
Incompleteness theorem. And so for him, it is one of the most intellectual steps taken in the 20th century. The fact that Gödel showed that a mathematical solution could be true, yet there would not be any way to prove that it is true. Even though it is true, you cannot prove it that it's true. And how did Mr. McKenna interpret it is that his interpretation for real life of this mathematical theorem was that math has proven that there is no closure. And he further says that Gödel showed that 2 + 2 is a very strong tendency, not a law. Like I would see that to mean representation, like you have been talking about. Like it's a representation. It is not a law. It is not like this is how it is. It's the best we have right now. So it's a good representation. He meant that no program of formal analysis, I'm putting in here, will ever completely exhaust its subject. Since 2 + 2 is a very strong tendency and not a law, therefore a program of formal analysis will never completely exhaust its subject, that there will always be a residuum of mystery. Now I watched your videos, like I said, and I thought what he's talking about, the residual mystery is what you talked about, what you probably call as factual emptiness. Is it right?
No, I think those are two different things.
Please
so
explain.
So the factual emptiness that I was talking about was for the philosophical question of whether abstract objects exist. And so I've argued for this view that you can construct a realist Platonist view and solve all your problems and have a coherent view of mathematics and everything works. And you can also set up an anti-realist view and solve all the problems and everything can work. And the two views actually look very similar. The only thing they disagree about is this brute question about whether the objects actually exist, but they're causally inert, so they wouldn't matter. And I have this argument that, so this question then is, well, do they really exist or not? That's the pure metaphysical question. And I've argued for this claim that there's no right answer to that question, because it's too unclear what the objects would be if they existed as non-mental, non-physical, non-causal. We don't even really know what that would even be. And so I've argued there's no right answer to the question of whether they exist. And so the philosophical, metaphysical question is factually empty. So I think it's different because the person you were talking about, his name's Terence McKenna. Is that right?
Yes.
He seems to be talking about mathematical questions.
Yes. Particular Gödel, that one.
Yeah. So I would not think that those are factually empty. I think that mathematical questions can be factually empty in very specific cases. And that's, I think, brought on when our mathematical concepts are not precise enough. So I was talking about the continuum hypothesis before. I think it may be that there's no right answer to the continuum hypothesis if our concept of set is not precise enough to give it an answer. But I would not go along.
No,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, no, before, I think there is some confusion on my end. So what he's saying is, I would also like to hear your interpretation of what does that really mean. Like, something is true, but you cannot prove it. That's a mathematical statement. And, that's what Kurt Gödel found out, that it could be true, but you can't prove it. And we have experienced that in life, that I didn't steal it, prove it. No, I put it back, like, prove it. In just regular everyday life, sometimes it happens. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it. But the thing is, what Mr. McKenna is saying is that this shows that you cannot prove, and the fact that then I think he moves on to another example where he says how 2 + 2 is 4. This 4 is basically just a representation or just a tendency. It's not a law that it is so. It's a tendency, right? And the fact that it's a tendency means that there is always a percentage of some mystery lurking, which makes sure that this stays a tendency and not becomes a law. So I thought that bit that he's talking about, the mystery, is like the factual emptiness. That's what I was comparing. Maybe I think there's a disconnect somewhere.
No, I think I understood when you said it the first time, and I just think it's different because I was talking about a philosophical question being factually empty. He's talking about a mathematics. He's talking about a mathematical question.
Okay.
So there's two different things going on here. One is about unprovable truths that Gödel showed, and the other is about this tendency, not lawfulness, of 2 + 2 = 4.
Yes.
And I want to say very different things about those two things. So as far as Gödel goes, I just want to clarify one thing. Gödel did not come up with a sentence and go, this is true, but we can't prove it. Rather, what he showed was that if you lock it, so provability is always relative to an axiom system, to a formal system. So I can give you the 7 axioms of piano arithmetic and go, this is our system, piano arithmetic, these 7 axioms. Now, what can we prove in this? And what Gödel did was he found a sentence that's not provable in piano arithmetic. I'm not done yet. That's one consequence of Gödel, is that from piano arithmetic, there's a sentence that you can't prove in piano arithmetic, but we know it's true. And basically the sentence says, it's self-referential, and it says, I'm not provable in piano arithmetic. That sentence is not provable in piano arithmetic, but it's true. What Gödel proved is that for any axiom system, you can always find a sentence that's not provable in that system. And the sentence always says, I'm not provable in the system in question. But the sentence for piano arithmetic, the sentence that Gödel found, let's call it G, is provable in another system. You can go to a different axiom system that proves G, but that system will have other sentences that it can't prove.
That it cannot prove.
Yeah, so what Gödel showed is that any axiomatic system in mathematics that's strong enough to even give us basic arithmetic will always have unprovable truths. So for the way to think of it is, for any axiom system you lock in on, there will always be unprovable truths.
Got it.
Okay, that's what Gödel proved.
Okay.
Now, this business about 2 + 2 = 4 being a tendency and not a law, here's what I want to say to this. That sounds wrong to me.
Huh.
I suspect that if I went and read this book, I would go, oh, that's what he means by it. There are ways I can, there are things I can think that somebody might mean by that makes me go, oh, okay, that's right. But like the straightaway way of understanding it, 2 + 2 = 4, the sentence in English that says what we think it means, 2 + 2 = 4, is just true, and it's necessarily true, and it's proven from standard arithmetic. What he might mean is like, oh, it's possible to construct a different theory where 2 + 2 = 4 comes out not true. In which case I want to go, yeah, that's definitely true. We can do that. But in that system, I think the sentence 2 + 2 = 4 wouldn't mean what we mean by it. The thing we mean when we say 2 + 2 = 4 is just true. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure what he means when he says that, but the way I would flat-footedly interpret the sentence 2 + 2 = 4 isn't a law, it's a tendency, my reaction would be like, oh, that's wrong.
That's wrong. It's complete. It's complete. Yeah. 2 + 2 is 4. Okay. Okay. I have one last question, and we can wrap this up.
Okay.
What does belief mean to a philosopher of mathematics?
Well, I mean, it's a hard question. I mean, belief is a thing that philosophers talk about a lot. It's not a thing that philosophers of mathematics talk about a lot. It's more a thing that people talk about in the philosophy of mind or in free will. So I was saying before, so I think a lot of people think, and this idea probably goes back to David Hume. Maybe it's older than that, but basically you were saying what moves us is pleasure and pain. Or at least you were asking that, and I was saying that. But really what moves us is our beliefs about what's going to be painful and what's going to be pleasurable, and our desire for pleasure and not pain. And so really the things that are really moving us are beliefs and desires. And I was saying before that we don't seem to have much choice in our desires. They just happen to us. And the same thing is true of belief. And this is a thing that virtually all philosophers agree on. And it's a thing that when non-philosophers first hear this, they think, what? Of course I can choose my beliefs, like my political beliefs. But like, it's actually not true when you think about it. So like, the sky is blue. So what if I said to you right now, it's the same thing I said to you about desire. Right now, I want you to believe that the sky is green. You'd be like, well, I can say that the sky is green. I can pretend that I believe that the sky is green, but I don't. And I can't just do it. And I think that's true for like religious and political beliefs too. Like, I don't know what your beliefs are about God, but like, if you go up to a standard person who believes in God and go, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $1 million if just for 1 minute, believe that there's not a God. They can't do it. And likewise for an atheist, if you go $1 million, all you got to do is for 1 minute, believe that there's a God and then go back to being an atheist. You can't do it. Like, you don't have a choice over your beliefs. And so I guess I think the thing I want to say about belief, not really as a philosopher of mathematics, but just as a philosopher, is beliefs aren't the things that we have a choice about, aren't the kinds of things we can choose. They just happen to us. We just find ourselves believing things. And I mean, the way I would like to think about it, and I think this is a popular view among philosophers, is we are moved by the evidence. But we observe the evidence, and then we just find ourselves believing things and not other things. But we don't choose our beliefs.
But they're malleable, right? Through this evidence that we see.
Yeah, of course. So if you believe that all swans are white and then I show you a black swan, you will suddenly start believing that all swans aren't white, that at least some swans are black, but you won't choose to do that. That change in belief will just happen to you based on your observation.
Great.
Right? You can't then go, I can't go, no, I want you to right now believe swans are white, all swans are white anyway. You're like, I can't, I just saw the black swan.
Evidence. So, yeah. Dr. Balaguer, thank you for your time. Thank you for your clarity. Thank you for your answers. And thank you for spending this quite a bit of time with me.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It was fun talking to you.
Great. Okay, then. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
My conversation with Dr. Balaguer showed me the important role that philosophy plays in math and also in regular life. He also helped me think of philosophy as a way of looking, and a way of looking as a philosophy in itself. It will be wonderful to know your thoughts on the interview, and if it inspired your worldview in any way. Thanks for being here. I will see you soon with another interesting mind, demystifying another interesting topic. Until then, take care.